Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to TechGig webinar series, our endeavor to empower techies. We believe that sharing of knowledge is the key to enhance our skills and grow us as professionals. With this principle in mind, we have initiated a series of webinars conducted by industry experts to give you all a crisp insight of various domains. The topic of today's session is Managing Project Work, IT Service Industry. Our guest speaker today is Mr. B.G. Jayaram, Associate Vice President and Head PMCOE at Infosys Limited. B.G. Jayaram is Associate Vice President and heads Infosys Project Management Center of Excellence. He has over 35 years of work experience that includes 20 years with the Indian Navy and later with IT industry. B.G. Jayaram has a specialization in anti-submarine warfare of Indian Navy. He has managed different types of projects including product development, equipment development and organization setup, etc. Jayaram has experience and expertise in being associated with large projects in defense sector. He is a regular speaker, panelist and panel anchor in project management forums. He has been on various project management leadership forums and currently the president of PMI Bangalore chapter. So without further delay, I introduce you to our guest speaker, Mr. B.G. Jayaram. Over to you, Mr. Jayaram.
Thank you very much, Girima. Hello and greetings to all the webinar attendees. I'm told that there are over 838 registered participants and from different parts of India and other countries. Thank you very much for your time and interest. And also thank PMI India and TechGig for the invitation. Let us, while the session is for about 45 minutes, I'll try and cover the areas that we are looking for, and if there are any views and suggestions from you as well as questions, we'll try to answer it at the end of the session. When this seminar was asked to be presented, I was looking at what is that area of project management and program management which is obvious but not explicitly told. And I have chosen a topic which is linked to managing project work in IT services industry. I would like to have this seminar, a webinar conducted over giving a little bit of brief on a service industry, work in IT services industry, work with service provider, a few scenarios, and then probably we could summarize the objective of this seminar in the learning. Two scenarios are considered in this entire seminar. One is an in-sourced versus the other one as the service provider as using a service provider in a project and program. Most examples are IT service based, but this can be extended to other industries as well with the suitable changes. I'm sure I would like to make this clarification here that the statements, comments in this webinar are purely personal and not related to my current employer directly or indirectly or by any other organization where I hold honorary role. Keeping the time limits, I would discuss a few of the key topics and you are most welcome to connect if you have any questions subsequently. Service industry, is a unique characteristics. You would find that the service industry, has some some areas of where what is so different in an IT service industry regarding project management that needs special attention. There are some areas which is not as tangible, as visible as in other industries. And what aspect of project management changes when a service provider is a part of a project? It does occur in all industries, but in an IT industry, its impact is high. And this webinar is to provide insight into some of these points that helps to uncover hidden aspects of project program management with this expertise industries. About service industry. Now, service industry provides services rather than goods. An industry made up of companies that primarily earn revenue through providing intangible products and services. That's where the challenge of the service industry starts coming in. Its services are most of the time intangible, and then it's the service results. The service industry is the backbone for regional economic and development. It has emerged as the fastest growing in the world. So if this is what is the importance of service industry, let us look into a little more as to how service industry is contributing and associating in project and program management and its impact. Service provider is essentially a part of an organization or a system. Sometimes they're called vendor, sometimes supplier, sometimes contractor, sometimes seller. I have chosen to use service provider for certain specific reason. The service provider has to work along with the client or the organization for whom project programs are made, unlike a seller who could be away from there and provide finished products. So that's the reason why I have chosen in this webinar to choose as the service provider. I'm sure many of you know service industry generates 2/3 of GNP and employment in developed countries. Service industry's importance is growing in developing countries. There are a number of service industries: retail, distribution, financial, hotel, tourism, leisure, recreation. I am looking at IT services, which comes under professional and business services. Now, with certain background of what we talked about services industry, let us look into it for a project, program, or an operation work. Services are used. It's not very common to have a project or a program delivered without the skill and capability of a service industry. At times, in-house services are used but within the company, so therefore you could call it as insourcing, and large and medium projects always have external service providers and it cannot be just in-house. I'm looking at this diagram. It's a typical project work executed. You have the project plan, you have a monitoring team. It could be a team which has got other organizations such as steering committee. It could be a department head who monitors, manages the projects. You have in-house team 1, in-house team 2, service provider 1, service provider 2. So at times you may have to do it in tandem, in parallel. The project and program gets executed. At times it could be the external service provider alone conducts and the monitoring is done internally. So looking at these aspects, work in a service industry mostly involves being a part or contributing to the client organization goals and objectives. That is where I use the word service industry rather than saying selling of a product. So the part of the service that is provided in a project and a program environment is focusing towards the goals of the client. Most client brings service vendor when a decision has been made to use external vendor or a service provider for a part of the work, or at times the entire work or a large part of the work. So that's a call which changes with environment. Project program management techniques are adopted by client and so by the service vendor. Most government and public sector units use service providers as the main implementers. So the project program management adopted, are they different or are they same? If An organization is having a project or a program manager and they employ a service vendor, does the project management change? This is the focus of today's discussion. So we are looking at service provider in a project program. What difference does it make when a project or a program work is done by a service provider? Obviously, it's very easy to look at one part. There will be more than one project manager. Vendor would say, I would have a project manager. Client has got a project manager or a program manager. And sometimes if you have given a multiple vendors, each vendor would say, I've got a project manager for my part of the work. So more project managers, obviously, you can imagine the challenges. The way the work is done in a project or a program changes considerably, though project program objectives remain same. I can execute the same project without an external vendor. The approach that is taken to do it would be different, and there are considerable changes when you induct partly an external service provider to provide it. One of the key things is there are layers of invisibility introduced and uncertainty is enhanced in the project or a program, and you have to accept that for the benefits that you are going to get while you are having the service provider. Projects are executed multiple ways, and trying to depict with a diagram, in-house or sourced internally within the organization. Sometimes part of the project work with use of service provider, sometimes large part of using the service provider, and many occasions project work entirely by the service provider. Each has got its own connotations, it has got its own implications. So if you are mostly the work is managed in-house with resources, then it has its own advantages. It could be an organization metrics. It depends whether the organization is a little more strong metrics or if it is a weak metrics. Obviously, if it is a balanced metrics, you will have the project and program manager will have better interaction from the other functional leaders or unit heads. And if it is a weak metrics organization, yes, there will be challenges, but again, it's all within the organization. The project and program objective is for the organization, and therefore, the departments and the functional units would have a better understanding and the purpose. The organization culture, because it is a in-house resource project, you will also see that the culture is compatible and there will not be any asynchronous aspect of it. The in-house projects will also help ability to influence better for challenges faced by the project. There are occasions where there could be a financial issue, there could be a change in the scope. If it is in-house, the good understanding is available. The challenges can be taken to different levels. I'm not saying that there are in-house projects does not have any problems. It has one side of the coin, some advantages. We will look at into some of them, why we require the external service providers. The tolerance for impact and project delay and cost variations. If you see some of the large government projects, it is in-house, though they use with external service provider, but when it is done only internally, the total duration of the project probably becomes 3 or 4 times. And if you are employing an external vendor, because of the cost consideration, you have to complete the project on a given time. Also, if it is in-house projects, driving a high value from the relationship within the organization. So the project program manager and the sponsorer would obviously will have a good relationship which will help in deriving the best value. Of course, you are a part of the system. Now these are what looks very, very positive, and therefore it looks in-house expertise and resources helps in a good project management with all positive factors. Most medium and large projects and most programs use service providers to do a part of work, at times a large part of work. I've hardly seen a program where it is completely done inside, unless it's completely a confidential program for which you may draw resources, expertise from various parts of the organization or associated organization. You may not like to provide a service, external service vendor. Except in those situations, most programs and large projects use service providers. So service providers support project program will have dependency on complexity and criticality of the part of the project or the program that uses service provider. Sometimes the dependency on the service provider's outcome is high, then the criticality of the service provider's impact into the project will be different. If it is not to that extent, then the impact of the service provider or not having a service provider may not make too much of a difference. Maturity and expertise of service project manager to work in multi-vendor environment and varied contractual obligations. Over the period of time, if you look back from last probably in early 70s to early 80s to year 2000 plus, the contracts, character, dimensions, the strength as well as the tenor has completely changed. Can the service project manager manage this aspect other than the service providing? The service project manager may be an expert in the services that is provided, but they're also required to manage this aspect of it. Whereas even the client project manager requires to manage the service vendor under these contractual obligations. Effectiveness of a service provider work is integrated into overall project and program. How well it is done. We have heard at times we did give it to a service vendor or a service provider. Service provider's work is not integrating well because what we thought at the beginning of the project or halfway through, the changes that has happened has not been communicated well, and therefore the outcome, which is as per the contract provided by the service vendor provider, is not meeting the objective fully. There are a number of factors. Probably this itself we could take it across for a long period of time. Just trying to bring out a few viewpoints in a diagrammatic manner. In-house projects, generally you will have low IP and confidentiality issues, because even though there could be at different levels the project requires to be handled, since the employees or they are all in-house persons, there are lesser confidentiality issues and better influence of stakeholders. Some people may debate, no, it is always good to have an external specialist coming and speaking to influence the stakeholders. Yes, at times that may be true, but then there are many projects which you could have a better influence as an in-house project executed completely internally. The transition when somebody has to move into a different role and changes has to happen in an in-house project would be far smoother. And the project manager, the steering team has complete visibility of the project. If you have an external or the service provider included, that will help you to get the bandwidth released, either of yours or of your team or some of the key skill members. The service provider also helps to provide you expertise in the area which your own team may not be sure or they may not be having it. So therefore, that gap is filled. And it also brings in necessity to contract administration. It's an imperative factor that if you have a service provider, you require to have the contract administration. I try to bring across a few of the key areas which comes with the service provider as a part of the project and program team. Service project manager, that is the service provider's manager. One of the challenges that the moment you say that you have got a service project manager is limited information in a proposal, or even if you do not want to have a competitive RFP, you may say that, okay, here is the project that I want to give it to the sole vendor and here is the information. But then that would be the difficulty, that you would see that limited information would be there. It could have missing or incomplete information. It depends on how much information you can give it to get the proposals from different vendors. So incomplete information gets revealed only in the later stage of the project. So this is one of the challenges that has to be looked at it, that when a service provider is included, is the information available for the service provider is adequate, complete, both from the understanding of the service provider as well as internally. It depends on who is making the draft SOW for the service vendor. If some critical dependencies is left out, that would come later stage as a change request, that will come later as saying that there is a gap or the alignment is not right. Ability to articulate critical information depends on how the client organization person is dividing the work. At times, for certain risk mitigation factors, the job is given across to multiple service providers. How well it is articulated and divided, and how is the integration part planned. If that has not been done, the project management challenges will creep in. Here is uncertainty creeping in and the possibility of variance that gets detected in subsequent stages. Estimation is always based on limited available information the service provider gets, who also has plans on time, solution, service premises. It all depends upon how accurate, how logical this information is given. In a routine operation, this is far easier, because that's why it is called routine operations work. The moment you say project, uncertainty is already there, and if the information provided to the service provider for asking for quotation, asking for proposals and estimation is not complete, you would always find that there could be a mismatch. Using a service provider, most large projects have an imperative to use service provider. One of the reasons is the risk transfer strategy is why a lot of people use service providers as a driving factor. Either the client organizations don't have or not sure of a skill or a competency, they don't have in-house bandwidth to execute, they have skill but the resource cannot be released when needed, or they have expertise yet creating a bandwidth for other requirements. There are also occasions where for the cost requirements the external service provider may be used because you may not like to invest it for one-off services job that is required. But when you see a service provider, leadership needs are required, and project with service provider, if you don't have a good leadership, the project may get into problem rather than getting the help of service provider. Relationship management expertise does on both the sides, the client project manager as well as the service provider project manager. Do they have the ability to build relationship? There will always be conflict of interest. There will always be the service provider would like to make sure that the projects or the work is done on time, because the service provider goes to provide services to multiple companies, and it is the providing service is the source of revenue. Whereas the client project manager is investing on project, there could be a delay due to change in the strategy, there could be a delay due to change in certain business methodology or planning, and therefore there could be a delay in the work to be completed by service provider as sign-off has not been given. Then ultimately, are you able to build relationship? Levels of expertise needed increases with number of service providers. If you are handling a service providers for your project with 90, 100 or 200 service providers, the ability of relationship building and managing them by the client project manager or the program manager is enormous. So when you are selecting the project manager or the program manager, it is not just the expertise or the level of past experience in project program management, it's also the type of relationship or the expertise required for that particular project program. complexity and criticality of work done by a service provider is a key factor. If it is a very complex or a critical work to be done, obviously the client project manager as well as service project manager requires to have certain minimum level of relationship ability as well as leadership ability. It's not that whoever is available I can fit in. No one size fits all solution is most improbable in service providing. Leadership needs with project service provider, company values, ethics, culture, adherence. Now when you have external service providers working at multiple areas of your project and program, you would like that to be adhered to. Leadership to take beyond contract compliance and clauses. That is where the leadership of the client project manager as well as the service project manager comes into picture. Leadership level would indicate drive, initiative to make the progress. There are always one of the two sides which could cause the delay in the project progress for either difference of opinion or because of certain obstructions that has been, sign-offs have not been done, certain reasons with which the progress gets stopped. Who is taking the drive and initiative? Influence of service providers' action and priorities. How does the service provider is able to look at the objectives and end objectives and prioritize and provide support to the client project manager who should be reciprocating and understanding the value provided. Collaborative approach to solve the problem. The moment it is contractual and if it is said that okay, I will stick to my contract and this is what is written, let it be decided in a legal fashion or arbitration, then the objective of the project will go for a toss. Building interaction to performance, delivery, value provided, innovation, all of them are essential. Because it's not just the delivery, it is not just the value provided. As a service provider at that time, the leadership has to bring in innovations. So if you are using people who are not having this level of leadership, the service provider will be able to provide just the service that has been written and defined, but it doesn't move beyond to the next level. Now when you look at the client PM environment versus the service PM environment to get a better understanding, assume that only client project manager is there and we don't have a external service provider. Obviously you can see that project scope is defined in totality, mostly better understanding on the purpose because it is in-house. Project cost is estimated, managed entirety within the organization. And therefore except for external purchases etc., you would find that the cost implications are all within the organization. And the norms for tolerance and better understanding with all stakeholders. But if you have a service project manager, that is service provider as a part of the project scope may be visible to the extent service is requested. So the service project manager may not get the complete picture. At times it is too voluminous for the type of services required to provide, unnecessary. It could also be due to confidentiality and to protect the business interest. So you may not like to share everything with the service project manager. Project cost is limited to the service work allocated. So therefore, the service project manager may not be able to provide ideas which may involve higher cost. Obviously, the service project manager is bound by contract. Once a contract is signed, it is not that it is signed for just like that. It has to be followed. There are penalty clauses, and as per agreement, requirements has to be done. The relationship, the leadership, the collaboration has to move over and above this contract and penalty, and that depends upon the expertise of the person who is doing either a vendor project manager or the service provider project manager or a client project manager. Limited view of a service project manager has got a limited view of the dynamics of an organization. The client organization may be undergoing major changes within the organization. There may be a portion of the organization which is going to use this project and program may be getting affected in business. There may be some mergers happening across. There may be some portion of the organization being sold off, which has got an impact. The service project manager will get to know this only almost at the stage when it is being put into action. They would not have a clear view earlier. Again, going into only client PM, if you are having only in-house project management and no external service provided, the changes to the project can be negotiated as it is internal to the organization based on time factor and expertise availability. We have seen across at many occasions changes that has been brought out can be, if it is not feasible to be completed due to availability of resources or the cost, etc., it can be negotiated better and the project can still complete on time if it is worth completing it without changes. If there is a changes required, then it is also easier to get negotiated and get approval for necessary changes to the project completion, scope, etc. A good knowledge of organization, culture and process assets are possible because it is an in-house developed project. Change in project management plan approach is easier to implement. If you have external service provider, changes to project gets negotiated with financial implications and the time factor being predominant. Also for a service project manager, contract adherence overtakes the client PM interest unless there's a good understanding and relationship. Because if you are trying to provide help beyond the contract, you have the service project manager has to balance between the interests of the client and the interests of the service providing organization. And that is a tough balance to be done. Some of the key skills of a service project manager, it is also applicable in a slightly modified fashion to the client project manager, but we're looking at from the service provider project manager, communication across functional lines. You could imagine the amount of communication which includes negotiation, interaction, building relationship, the service project manager has to do with his own team, with service provider organization, with the client key stakeholders, at times through client key stakeholders to the client's clients, then other external service providers. So building relationship is a key, and if you see that building relationship and communication goes hand in hand, because if you don't have a good communication skill, not very easy to build relationship. Negotiating both in the organization and outside the organization. The service project manager should have the ability to document and reporting status, results, costs, changes, minutes of meeting, agreements, lessons learned. If you are having a large projects and programs under a service project manager, if you are not providing it, it would be extremely weak skill for the service project manager. Budgeting and analyzing to a certain level is required. Working with multiple stakeholders. As I mentioned earlier, you have too many number of stakeholders for a service project manager to manage. And when you are looking in terms of the problem solving ability stands out again for the service project manager, because the problems sometimes flows into the service project manager through the client project manager. Foreseeing risks. A lot of occasions, if the service project managers are not able to foresee, identify, analyze risks and track up to date, the projects will be in problem. The risks may be the responsibility, or the risks have been induced maybe because of the service project manager's type of work and design, or it could have been due to the client project manager's requirement. But in totality, foreseeing the risks, identifying and analyzing it. As I said again, I want to re-emphasize that while service project manager is able to provide the services in which the service provider has been called for, from a project program perspective, these are the additional part of it. Understanding of contractual commitments and flexibility to manage changes. The service project manager has to be able to find what flexibilities to provide changes because these contractual commitments has to be executed in spirit, because these are not operations, these are not repeated services that we are providing, these are projects and programs which has got uniqueness and built-in uncertainty. The service project manager also requires ability to guide service providing team to a solution optimally, where at times, because of the non-visibility, you are used to the way the service is provided. There may require to be tweaking, there may require to be changing. Understanding of service value to client and impact of deviation. Now this is to be there from the beginning of the project, because the service provider may be doing their job, but then do you understand that is there a change that has occurred which the outcome of our service may provide or may not provide value to the client? And can I provide a deviation? Where is the impact? So having a close relationship towards the client, project and program manager and their objective forms a critical part of it. Now client PM's essential skills are: role of a vendor manager comes in many sizes and profiles, and each role and situation has its unique set of competencies needed for a person doing that of a to be effective job. I've intentionally put it in a different font just to highlight that this is one of the key factors where a lot of large and complex projects fail, because the role of the vendor project manager is not adequate, though individually the client manager, who is the vendor project manager, is highly competent from the project or the professional aspect of it in the business domain, may or may not have ability to manage with vendors and get the necessary services. There is not a universal skill set that can be made effective vendor manager or a service manager to manage the various vendors. There are many factors determine what competencies or capabilities are needed. How do you assess specific skills and expertise of a vendor manager will need? You're already appointing a project or a vendor manager for the program, and it's only much later you may be getting a lot of vendors into the program. Not all projects and programs are same. Not all companies are same. And not all vendor relationships are same. So given this, the extra thought to look at it as to what project and program and what type of vendors I'm using, and therefore should I use the same client PM to manage vendor manager, or should I use an additional expert vendor project manager? If you are using a vendor manager by the client, then it also costs extra money. So this is one aspect which is to be seen across, and a lot of large and medium to complex projects becomes fait accompli to use the existing vendor manager, or the service provider gives the best that is available, but not from the perspective of how to make this project and program successful. The risks to foresee. On using a service provider, there has to be an additional focus to see giving away the business intellect. Is there a risk of that? Is project getting controlled by service provider? Probably one or two examples we'll see that where large service providers who have been in service, who have got a large programs executed, may influence the other client to follow the procedures that they are doing across. Otherwise they will not be able to provide the service. So the client project manager or the client follows the procedures that has been used by the service provider. Inability to assess service delivery aspects early. Are you sure that the service provider will be able to provide? What is the credentials? What is the ability that has been sustained over a period of time? Possible cost increase due to quality aspects. Not comfortable by many internal stakeholders to have service providers interacting with them. I'm sure many of you have experienced this. Impact of stability, reliability of service provider organization. The organization may be fine. How stable is it? Is the resources with them? Are those resources are the right resources, and do they have the expertise? Are they to what extent is the outcome of the service provider is depending on the project and program. If it is a key aspects of it, that forms additional risks. A service provider giving subcontracting possibilities? No control over service provider's internal process. It's very rare. It becomes an issue whether do you want to do the micromanagement or you want to keep an hands off. Micromanaging with a service vendor may withdraw, or it may not be easier for you to do micromanagement. Hands off approach is also nice. So it's a question of finding out project managers from the client who can manage balance between the both and appropriately use it. There are possible areas of compliance gaps. If you are using an external service vendor, how do you make sure that this compliance gaps are bridged? Because the service vendor does provide this service to multiple people, may or may not have complete understanding of your compliance needs versus some other organization. Few scenarios I just wanted to take to bring it out. There was a technology company engaged with a service provider of a different country, culturally very different. Strong differences in mindset. The client organization felt that if a service provider doesn't meet the SLAs or does not provide the as stipulated, punitive action and penalties has to be put. Whereas the service project manager and the organization had the mindset of collaboration and friendliness approach. It's difficult for projects to progress if you have a combative relationship between the client project manager and the service project manager. Another instance where a Fortune 500 company engaged a service provider application development, the service provider forcing their methodology process due to their strong experience with large clients. They would quote that, okay, this is what we have done with this company, this is what we have done with this company, and this have all done very well. So therefore, this is the way it is work and this is how we will do it. So service provider and client company culture varied largely. And one of the reasons was the SLAs was loosely defined. Well-established service provider forcing an approach who can become a challenge. A large company doing outsourced database management as a strategy, many ex-employees came as a service provider because these people who had left the company came back as a service provider. The attitude of the same employees who were there as a colleagues was entirely different from when they came back as service providers. Contract-driven mindset, different from in-house colleagues. In-house colleagues who could get any amount of additional work on the scope. Change order request poured for everything. So considering that, I was given about 40 minutes of time as we are ending up, some conclusions that we could draw: project managed by a service provider would be different from a typical in-house, in-source project execution. Now that consciousness will make a lot of difference going on to the next step by the client project manager as well as service provider project manager. Successful use of service provider involves balancing the risks and benefits of using external expertise for a set of work. Work that is beyond the capabilities of internal staff or cannot be performed cost effectively in-house, you may have to no choice but to do it. I've tried to put this diagram to give a conclusion where I've indicated in-house execution, which has got advantage of flexibility, better stakeholder management, IP and business process confidentiality, whereas service provider getting released the right skilled persons, quality of output, infrastructure available for adoption to newer trends. If you are having an in-house value, documentation and details available, transition needs much better effectively. Service providers' value will be the bandwidth released and newer ideas and methods that flows in. The challenges are expertise needed by service provider varies with project work assigned to them. Work outside the client control can become a black box. Service provider PM sees lesser work due to informal blockage. Service provider PM, obviously ability to build relationship, communicate effectively, build trust and reliability, balancing client and service provider organization interest ethically. If you are looking at an in-house project manager, ability to manage service providers effectively, ability to manage risks due to service providers inclusion in the project, and again balancing between micromanagement and hands-off approach. From an organization perspective, culture of organization to use service provider effectively is important. If not, it has to be built up. Recognition and developing service provider strategically is a key factor. I think with this, I try to conclude this webinar presentation. Look forward for any of your questions that I may be able to answer.
Thanks for the insightful presentation, Mr. Jayaram. Let's quickly take up the questions now. Please read out the questions and their answers so that all our users may listen to the commendable insights. Mr. Jayaram, the questions are there in your questions pane. You can go through the questions and start answering.
I'm yet to see that. Okay. I think the first question I can see is what is the advantage of a PMP? I think this is something outside the the topic, but here I would like to, I myself being a PMP, I would like to indicate one part of it. Whichever certifications you take, including the PMP which I have gone through, it provides you first a conceptual understanding, and in preparation to an examination you will start analyzing various aspects of scenarios in which these the questions will be put, the concept will be tested, and that is the biggest learning. If somebody has internalized the concepts of various aspects of project management, understanding what degree of project management is used in different environments, that's the biggest learning that I foresee. I'm still having the difficulty. Okay, I can see a question that does project management changes for kind of application is developed by organization, for example, mobility, web-based enterprise. In my view, the project management has organizational, enterprise, environmental factors. Even if I take mobility itself, if I am developing a project in an organization which is, let me say that public sector undertaking is entirely different from when I take it across to a smaller organization which is just beginning compared to a government organization which is developing this for a defense application. So therefore the project management components will change, but the structure of project management is definitely remains the same. You start with an objective initiative, do the planning, monitoring, execution, control, and closure. While the wrapper appears to be same, the content inside those wrapper will be different. Obviously, if it is web-based or if it is enterprise mobility applications, there are changes that comes into it. Which step must be important at first stage before going to start a new project? I was looking for more questions on the managing IT project with vendors. Okay, service providers. I think the first stage is that project is essential and who is going to get benefited out of it. What is the purpose for which we are doing the project? Is it project is being done as an experiment or a POC? Is the project being done with a object to build expertise, or is project being done with a business objective or a social objective? I think that alignment in clarity, and I prefer it in writing, is good, because at some stage we can revisit back and say that, okay, is it what we are doing maps with the objectives that we have set and the value that it is going to provide. Generally, the client asks for additional features which they are not aware of. As a service provider or a project manager, what is the tolerance level? This is a question which we do come across very frequently in all project management forums. And I think there are plenty of examples to be picked up for this from operational area to help. If you are constructing a house and if you ask your engineer to construct a free room, extra room or something else, there are only two things that is possible. One is that from the part of the profit that the individual manager, the engineer is constructing, he would forgo and give you to build relationship. The other part is that conserve some amount of money from various aspects of the project and build it and give it to you. Ideally, the third part, which normally everybody expects, is that you pay additional for this. If at all if the client asks for additional features and you want to do it as an incentive, keeping in mind project PMI's advocacy of the gold plating, you may like to make sure that you charge for that portion and then give a discount and say that, okay, I have provided you, this is what costed me, and now I am providing you the original bill as a service provider had taken. This balances both. You have also kept the relationship, you also showed how you have accommodated, but then you have not charged. At some point, probably you can collect all the free goods that you have given and tell the client what extra value you have given from your own profitability or whatever it is. Does PM has any scope of doing development himself in a certain circumstances? Then he has a role changed to a, I cannot see that, I don't know whether it went away. So there are occasions when the project is handled by 2 or 3 persons team. I still cannot see what is, I can't see after what is role changed to, okay. So there are occasions when it is your job is not a full-time project manager. You are wearing the multiple hats of a probably technology manager, you are wearing the hat of a developer for a small simple project. You are also doing the role of a project manager for that, and you may even be domain expert. So it is quite possible, as long as you know, you're conscious of what hat you are putting and when you are doing multiple roles. In any case, many project managers does the line manager's role along with project manager's role. Many of the IT services companies have this common. So therefore, wearing multiple hats is good, but wearing is tough, but has to be conscious. This question is on, can you please throw some light more often? Agile methodology is proven method which is mutually beneficial to both service provider and the client organization. It may be yes, but can every project work be done in an agile methodology? May not be. So it depends on whether there is a suitability of agile methodology. Like the way when you engage a service vendor, service provider for a project, the involvement of client as well as the responsibility of service provider is there. Even in agile methodology, both should be capable of doing it. If one of them is not capable of doing it, it may still not provide benefit. So where it is beneficial, obviously it provides advantage to both. The next question is, in every project, the in-house PM works towards closure time, whereas the client PM works and wishes to have more features than committed. In this scenario, how an in-house PM should work? We also have a challenge where does the in-house PM may be wearing multiple hats, is also the departmental or in charge for that work. The in-house PM has toughness of convincing internally because of the relationship. If my boss is the project sponsor or the director, and if there's additional work to be done, how do I communicate that person that, these are the additional work? And it says that in-house PM works towards the closure in time, but at times even the cost of the project is also looked at, quality of the project is also looked at. So whereas the client PM wishes to have more features, you may like to have more features, but if it is not a part of original project, at what cost you are doing it? I think treating the in-house projects like a service provider project, or I would like to use the word professional project management approach within the organizational environment, is the best answer. The above question is in terms of service management for in-house program manager. I'm not still sure what is the, if it is a service management for in-house program manager, there are different groups which are providing in-house. It's a purely functional organization. And if they are providing service for the program manager, there are certain commitments which are there. They also should like to use certain good norms of a professional or a service provider, where this is the estimation, this is the cost. If I have other commitments, I will not be able to extend it unless I get a waiver for the other earlier work that is there. The question is coming as, who is the scope owner? Can you please rewrite the question? I'm not able to read that question. I'm only getting one liner there. Can I have the next question? I'm not able to read beyond that. Who is the scope owner? You'll have to bear with me because I'm trying to see this. Okay, who is the scope owner? Whether it is SPM, an offshore PM, or an SPM or an offshore PM, the service provision manager establishes good relationship and tries to gold plate, sometimes unknowingly, but the burden is on offshore PM. Now again, you cannot have two project managers without the line of demarcation clearly indicated. These product companies use very clearly some of the good project management practices, where the technical manager has got certain role and responsibilities on the product, and the project manager has got certain role and responsibilities on the product. In this case, it is offshore versus on-site, or the onshore, or the service project manager or an offshore project manager. You will have to have clarity as to where the line is drawn, and that clarity is the one which brings out as to who is doing the gold plating and where it is to be stopped. Can I have the next question? if the client PM is not cooperative as a service provider, PM is a part of the small chunk of the project, how can relationship be built in this challenging situation? Obviously, yes. But I think this is where we talked of the service provider project manager leadership. It depends on which side are you. Obviously, assume that if you are the service provider project manager and if the client PM is not cooperative, we do come across the situations. You have also experienced the situation. This is the position where, depending on the circumstance, if you are looking for a silver bullet that we have to go and say sorry to him, no, that is not the way. If we can try and focus that if the relationship is not very good, in spite of that, if our focus is on providing the service for which we have entered into a contract or an agreement and still interacting with the client PM and then influencing others to influence about your capability, because we are the service provider. It is, unless it is very unethical or the cooperation is such that you are not able to perform job in a way in which you are supposed to be doing it across, then you have no choice but to walk out. But that is the last thing that one has to do as a service provider. And if you have the ability and interest to continue, you would come across different people. Everybody will not get the right type of people all the time. We have experienced there are different teachers in the class. Some of them are extremely good teachers, some of them are okay. We still learn, try to ask more questions from them, try to involve. They may not be trying to answer. Similarly, you may have client PM who is not cooperative. Yeah. Sorry folks, I am able to see the questions better. If the client PM, I think I answered across, if the client PM is not cooperative as a service provider, it is for us to build, and that is where our ability to change a person who is not cooperative to see only the aspects of service that we have provided and to appreciate to an extent is the leadership that involves. Can I see the next question? Your recommendations to have more influence as a service provider PM. See, one of the areas where we have seen as a service provider is that most of the people assume that the service provider has to be cheap, in the sense he has to provide services at a low cost but a high quality. No, it requires sometimes the organizations with whom you are dealing with. Yes, there are organizations you will get it across. But as long as you are convinced of what you are doing and what services you are providing, what is the cost implications and how you have agreed. Once that agreement is over, you would like to stick to it. Well, there are changes people look forward to. That's where the scope stability is to be seen by the service vendor also, even before accepting those clients. We are saying that we are a service provider where if it is a clear service, the variability is less. If it is a project related, you do have choices. So therefore, to influence, it is good to walk on steps of the service that you are providing, the professional quality and the value that you are providing, what else can be provided which costs more or which is not required, and a professional advice as to why some services which client may be asking may not be required. I think that professional approach is the only way to influence the service by the service project manager. Ideally, who is ideally responsible for business outcome of the service project? Project manager or project sponsor? I think the question starts with the project manager is the project manager. Service project manager is a part of the project who has supported, he has got a clear defined SOW he would provide, but it is expected from a service provider as a partner, as a relationship, as a trust, as an understanding of the client project. If he can provide additional value for the success of the outcome of the business project, is fine. Obviously, the project manager and the project sponsor would take the responsibilities as defined in the project charter. Next question I can see. Thank you very much. Somebody from South Korea at 7:30 p.m. going for dinner. Thanks for your presence in the webinar.
Are we done with the questions?
How do you manage? Yeah, how do you manage the multiple layer and invisible information part as per your initial slide on service provider? When you as a service provider, project manager works on a client project, this is where the service project manager's proactiveness and ability to ask and make the client project manager understand why you are asking. That's the only way. It depends on what expertise, what capabilities and what leadership service project manager you have used on a project which requires. Not every project will have invisibility, because if the service provider's role is defined clearly. But there are occasions where either due to non-availability of information at the client side itself, or due to the confidentiality of it, or due to business intelligence, certain information may not be provided. You may not like to get it at all. Still, if you think that there is some portion of information still required to provide a good value, it is the proactive involvement. It costs time, and time is money, and nobody would have anticipated. These are the additional investment the service provider will do with the project manager from the client side for building up trust, relationship and value add. How do you manage multiple layer of invisible information? I think I'm still seeing the same question. Is that the next question? Yes, I can see. Can I see the questions asked? Only the tech gig administrator should be able to tell. Will they be able to ask? Will they be able to see the questions that others have asked? How program management in product company is different from program management in a service industry? Are professionals from program management field in product companies accepted and entertained in service companies? It's a very loaded question, I can see. Program management in a product company is different from program management in a service industry. It again depends upon the program management principles could be same. There are differences, whereas in a program management of a product, you are trying to probably build the product or build different versions of the product or releases of a product. In a services company, you may be working across to one company for a particular service. After the project or program is over, you move on to the next company and somewhere else you will be providing the service. A product company may not change the product very, very often. So a program management in a product company has certain amount of historical information which will be of much higher use than in a services company, service provider. If the service provider is moving from organization to organization, if that person has completed the task, if he has undergone a major changes in a ERP implementation in one company, he must be going across to another company ERP implementation. So the learnings of ERP program management in a company is useful, but the other company may have different enterprise environmental factors. Culture could be different. So therefore, it does help. I don't think there is anything called accepted, entertained in service companies. Service companies do take, I think it's more on the individual capabilities of project program management rather than on whether they are service or not. We can push client PM to make it as a change request as it is not mentioned in SOW. But though they push us to deliver it, but there's no budget to include in CR. How to handle scenarios? I can see a lot of current day-to-day scenarios are coming in here for a question. This again depends upon the biggest advantage in project management is that I can use the word depends upon. Where it depends upon, when you talk of client, is it really a CR? It is like somebody asking across, if I ask for somebody to deliver some 25 items, does individual packages to be sent to different people, is it a part of my request or not? If I say that no, each one has to be made a gift pack because I am going to give it, he would say that I would not, you had not mentioned to me earlier. It may be a CR, it may not be a CR. So therefore, whether, first of all, is the CR is from the service provider side. Is it a CR? Is a question which has to be understood, which has to be met either by the triage team or the area. And once this is there, what is the process that you are following it across? Do you do the work and then raise a CR, or do you get a CR approved and then do the work? So depending upon the trust you have got with the customer, depending upon what you want to give it as a discount to the customer, as an extra of a risk that you want to take, this is how you have to go about it. I don't think you can find a single answer, but yes, the one part of it is, at the beginning, do you have a clear understanding of what is the change request process that you would like to follow? And then can we validate whether this is a change request or an incorrect interpretation? How detailed should be SLA be, and how tightly to be matched to SOW? I think again, it all depends upon what work, what impact is there, and what is the complexity. The moment you say SLA is coming into picture, it depends on what milestone agreement that you want to have. We are looking at project program management mostly, and less on operational support, etc., which is also service providers key. How will you rate the relationship building by vendor project manager with aspect of other project management traits in service delivery? I have seen some extremely good vendor project managers. There are occasions where vendor project managers have, where vendor managers have brought service provider project managers into the strategic meeting to identify is the solution what they are doing is right or wrong, well before even giving the project work or the part of the program work. It depends on the organization culture. It depends on the project director or the person who is driving it. What is the main reason for project failure in IT industry? The biggest challenge in IT industry is it's a knowledge-based industry, particularly IT services industry, and it is invisible. In a manufacturing industry, in a construction industry, if somebody says I have worked 7 hours, you could see, you could measure, you could validate even that 7 hours. If somebody says that I have done a design I have done a coding for 6 hours or 7 hours, it's not very easy to validate the work that is done. So while the advantages of an IT industry is that you can use, develop, construct large projects and programs anywhere, anytime. You can sit on a laptop. Deletion of any work that has been done requires only Control, Alt and Del. Unlike a manufacturing industry where you have to really spend money to demolish the work that you have done, the disadvantage is its invisibility and its ability to be, anything can be modified to change, is an advantage and a disadvantage. And that is why they are all valid. A coin has got both head and tail. So IT industry has a lot of positives and its own characteristics builds a lot of constraints and reasons. Geo-specific tips that can share example. I'm a service provider through TCS. I think we should require certain more time to look at it. And again, it depends upon geo-specific tips. There could be some which is very common to a particular geo, but many things are also geo with the company, with the type of the work that you are doing across. If you are looking at in terms of a service provider providing internet cable service sitting from anywhere, I do not know whether how much of geo-specific will matter. So it is very specific to the the type of work that you are doing. More information, maybe we may have to connect it later. This question is, how important has culture to play for service provider PM, and does it change for in-house PM? Does his decision making and leadership changes and also his style of management? Surely it has a lot of variations. A lot of times people say that certain things which you cannot convince internally, you may use a service provider who would provide and convince the in-house decision making. But on the other side, there are certain decisions project can execute. You can get requirements more candidly only when you have internal people, and you may not like to share some of the wounds an organization has got with the service provider. So therefore, the organization culture to play for the service provider PM, and it does change in-house. It has its advantages. You will have to judge what it is before making a decision. It is just like there are days when you may walk into a classroom as a faculty and you see that the students are not in a mood to learn for whatever reason. How do you make them learn without teaching formally? The same thing is not applicable for every day. Good relationship, only gold plating. Now that is the easiest way, because everybody thinks that if you give me more free, therefore you are a good person. But lest they understand that that money is also coming from them. Over a period of time, the gold plating will bring service provider into the problem. Because next time when the cost is increased, when somebody is quoting lower than you, they would ask, why are you not providing this? Why are you providing only the limited one while you have provided all these days? So what is done once becomes a precedence, and what is done twice or thrice becomes a habit. So that is why you will see that in operations, a lot of shops, they will say, no negotiations. You want to take it, you can take it. If you do not want, please go away. So you may be able to do that only when you are established. At the initial stages, it may require a lot of leadership to convince as to why gold plating costs you money. And if at all you are doing gold plating, please charge it, give a discount, indicate that you have given a free discount for somebody who asked for a $5 million business, 500 or 600,000 free work is done, discount it, and then still build it across. What is the boundary between value addition to the client and gold plating? Gold plating is something which you are doing extra over and above the scope. The value addition is something which you are doing within the given scope, which has got a better utility to the client. I think we'll have to explain it from, case to case basis. If there's an architecture which you think that a design does not require redundancy and it is only costing, and if you are giving that suggestion to the client, if the client accepts your suggestion, it's a value addition. If the client doesn't accept, leave it at that. But if you are suggesting alternative ways and client is asking you to do, if you are given across for a 5 modules to be done and then 1 more module to be done free of cost, it's a gold plating. It indicates that you have enough bandwidth and the profitability to accommodate more work if asked and negotiated. Would you like to be in that position? If you want to be in that position, then you are doing the gold plating. If you do not want to be in that position, you are building a relationship, you may give free of cost something, but you are going to charge and give a discount and make it explicit. Are the tools and techniques used for effort and cost estimation different for the same kind of project, for a service provider PM or in-house PM? It all depends upon what tools and techniques. I think the tools and techniques depends on organization environment. What do you want? It does not, it can be same, it can be different. Please share some of the best practices in relationship management from service PM as well as a client PM sides. I think it would take time. It won't be the right place to do this. But remember, as long as we respect and indicate that relationship is a part and not a one-time purchase. One-time sale is different and relationship is different. The relationship is meant for professional understanding to help each other. A doctor builds relationship with a client and therefore the patient is able to express certain things through which the doctor may or may not like to have, but then the confidence level is built. And then when the doctor is giving service to the patient, there are certain other factors which has been shared will also help. So I think this itself could be a one webinar.
Then thanks, Mr. Jayaram, for your session on managing project work.
The other question is,
are we taking more questions?
On this last question?
Are we taking more questions?
Okay, the last question I think.
Yeah, sure. Please go ahead.
Pardon?
Sure, please go ahead.
I can go up to 4:30. I will have to break off it further. When the project manager is being completed and handed over for maintenance, and for maintenance you have several bidders as a new contract, what best practice would you recommend? It all depends upon what experience the client has gone through during the project. It can be any one of them. The next question, if the client PM takes time to make decisions and affect the project schedule, how does the service provider PM manage this? This is a very, very common instance which many service providers see. And many occasions you would find that, you take a simpler example, I think at some stage you will have to take a call and try to see that the relationship is maintained. Beyond a point, are you ready to invest it of wasting time, or you would like to move on? You take, airlines is a service provider to you. If you get late, does airlines wait for you? They take off. So you are the client and the service provider takes off on time. Exceptions are there. If somebody is a very serious patient to be shifted somewhere, airlines may wait for 15 minutes. So I think this is a call which individual project managers will have to take based on their organization environment, their business environment, their service provider environment that is there, and efforts made for the client to tell that if I wait, this is the impact that I have got. Maybe a client may say that, okay, you go ahead with your next project, I will call you when I am ready to make decisions. If that is the case, both are benefited, win-win. Is retainer a service provider? Yes. Thank you, Liju. I can see you. Geo-specific PM tips that you can share. I think I did mention that this would take time and it may not be possible in the question answer session. In a fixed price project, when we uncover a major work for which the client is not ready to pay, how do we manage the situation? I think in any fixed price project, if the client is not ready to make for a major work for which you are going to incur a heavier amount, you may have to do all efforts to convince and indicate it at higher level. If it does not happen, probably you have got an exit clause. You may like to exit. In-house team is, the question is, if in-house team is not of that level expertise, then provide training to our people or to use service provider. Between both, which one is beneficial? These are all easy questions you are asking as project managers. It depends. It depends on various other factors. It is not a textbook. This is exactly where the topic that I chose was that while everybody manages IT project, we have to see little more into depth to see on the other finer aspects of project management expertise. As a project manager, what do you want to do? And for which you have to consider various parameters before deciding, should I use a service provider? There are occasions where there are hardly any service providers to use. And that service provider in that particular location may not be speaking the same language, may not be of the same caliber. The call has to be made. Or do you have your resources which are having more critical work? And therefore don't mind getting somebody else flying in and doing the job. It all depends. Can I take last 3 questions and wind up? So this is the first of the last 3 questions. For client PM, what do you advise for handling various types of vendor relationship, especially for many vendors? There are some clients who are extremely good vendor relationship managers. In fact, some of them may have multiple vendors relationship managers. They extract the best out of the vendor because they're employing a vendor for a job for which they don't have expertise. If you look at aircraft development, if you look at some engine development, if you look at certain areas in the manufacturing, vendors holds the key on very competitive topics, and they have the manufacturing ability, can produce prototype, they can even give insight to the client that what they can do which they had not thought of. So there are extremely beautiful and very interactive trusted client project managers. So therefore it depends on what you are handling and how you are handling and whom you have put it across. The moment you start understanding one of the project management, it can only be learned on the job. But having said that, learning from others in the company, putting things in a candid manner for internal understanding of what we have done correctly, what we have not done correctly, without worrying about whether it is individual being targeted. I think that helps a lot in learning. But the attitude to learn, and each project is different, is a very good approach. In the second question, the one more we'll take, how to draw a line about requirement stability index from a service project manager perspective, especially when the scope creep of the project is during execution. I think this is something which has to be thought of, and that is where the project manager's ability using his team to identify for a given solution, is the solution with the scope or the requirement given, is it stable? That is the expertise that the project manager has to build. And if it is highly technical, at times we may have to use the technical support for it. And understanding of the client's situation. I will take this as the last question. What are the alternatives for a service provider, project manager for a risk mitigation? I think it depends on what risk. I'm not too sure what risk was meant. What are the alternatives for a service provider PM for a risk mitigation? I think the same risk mitigation which the client PM does, the service PM also does from a different perspective. The risk for a service PM is different from a client PM because they are on two sides of a coin trying to make a coin. Service PM is providing service. So therefore, I'm providing service for a cost. The client PM is taking service and paying out and investing it in project for a business objective or whatever is the objective. So the risk management has to be done same. I thank all the attendees. I can still see, I think more than 228 people are there. It has been wonderful to have received questions from you. I would have loved to have received more questions. I have an engagement to move out. Thank you very much. Look forward to your questions, and any further discussions, we'll take it forward over mail or in another forum. Thank you very much. Thanks, TechGig and PMI.
Thanks, Mr. Jayaram, for your session on managing project work IT service industry. It was indeed a great session. I would also like to thank all our participants for their support in making this webinar a success. The recording of the webinar will be available on techgig.com by tomorrow. Thank you all once again.